Can you, thank you, Agnieszka. This is food for thought. And I think it's perfect that Marta gave a presentation about the mice work in between, because it's also about, it's not a neutral work. It is about taking care and about questions of how to take care. And I think it is specifically there where these artists, artist groups, artworks can further investigate these types of technologies, how they influence bodies. Knowing that Rob always talked about finding the ambiguities of these techniques. I think that is a pretty important thing here. Also because there is a lot of difference between an art practice and a scientific practice, and a fundamental scientific practice and an applied scientific practice. The work on zebrafish that José is doing is much more fundamental, I think, than, for instance, the application we saw about sexually maturing eels in order to make them reproduce before they swim across the ocean and back. That is taking care of our own body, I would say. So I think it said a lot about the question, what's to CRISPR, in fact.
Yeah, so you know, like if a contamination or mutation or this, you know, is our anyway ontological state, right? It's not something that we have some natural given fixed state of our bodies. Then the question actually in the moment when you start to consciously manipulate and transform is, you know, what are the implications of a certain desires that you are implementing into this, into the particular encounter or transformation? What are the desires? Whether there are certain presuppositions, and they are always there, right? We are within a certain discourse, we are within a certain social cultural norms. So I think what the artists are bringing constantly to the table is the situatedness, materialization of the encounter. That within, you know, the protocols of ethical committees is not always put on the equal attention. Hello?
Do you mean the protocol? Sorry to interrupt, Lucas. I just jumped in.
No, please go ahead. Quickly, one thing. A number of you know we did a series called Trust Me, I'm an Artist, working with consent forms. And so-called bringing a lot of ethical complications to the table. Yet what I also often observed in doing this, we brought mere types of bureaucracy to the table and not the real ethics. So actually we should redo the series again. But Manuela, please. You're muted. You wanted to say something or not? Otherwise, I would love to ask Pedro, for instance, what do you think about this? Because I understand your research is about the application of CRISPR technique, not only in the scientific field, but also a little bit in an artistic or creative field.
Okay. Thank you, Lucas. Actually, when I was hearing this talk by Agnieszka, by the way, very original talk. Like, I mean, I come from a very different background, as you may imagine. My background is on molecular biology and genetics. And now I'm more approaching the social and ethical side of this stuff. But this contamination seen in a different way, this is something that opens a little bit the perspective. And it was very original. I liked it very much. And to also complement with by answering to you, Lucas, so the work that I'm doing is based on understanding these social and ethical issues that surround the CRISPR-Cas technology. Of course, since I have the scientific view of it, and I'm mostly more aware of the technical problems that this pertains. I still, with the interviews that I've been doing and so on, I could see some of these issues, and one of them, and actually that was explored on the interviews that I did, and when I was hearing Agnieszka talk, I recognized it, which is these boundaries that exist between humans and animals, in the sense that when you are creating, for example, chimeras, either because you are moving some cells from humans to the animals and then modulating diseases with that, or even the other way around. You can actually you cannot do that, but you can ask about that. This is something that is also contemplated on the interviews that we did, trying to look for the way if scientists recognize this issue, this sort of contamination that is a natural one, of course, is not neutral, and perhaps it has sort of implications that we don't consider them maybe in our day-to-day, but they exist. And in that sense, I would say that artistic ways of increasing this awareness, it's something that is rather important, and maybe, I don't know if it's done that much. So I would say that this is something that in my view, it's very, how can I say, normalized in the scientific environment, but maybe not in the public sphere and maybe even other spheres. So that's one thing. In terms of how I see it, as I said, since I come from the scientific place, let's say, I see it as something normal, but to the use that we are used to think as well. So it's also nice to see it outside of that situation. What other types of situation can we envision here? So this is something. The other thing that I saw, and I'm almost finishing with this, when you were talking, I was remembering one thing that is very, I don't know if people also are aware of this, but we have in our own body more bacterial cells that we have of our own cells. This is something that it's not the difference that people thought with the ratio of 10:1 many years ago. It's rather more 1:1 ratio, but still we have more bacterial cells than our own human cells. So this is something that maybe is worth to think about, because we are used to this contamination in our natural evolution. Now, if we do genetic modification and we try to take this to another level, maybe this raises other questions when you try to mix different types of species than just, bacterial and human cells. So this is something that I would like to contribute, and this is sort of my, not answer, but comment, let's say. So yeah.
Thank you, Pedro. Could I also ask Günther to give a reaction on this? Also in relation to the fact that you are saying something about the relation between animal husbandry of the agricultural revolution that humans have caused, and the way we are still currently ever more appropriating bodies for our own use. As what Agnieszka is saying, it could be very interesting to work with more arts to put this into the discussion, how much further we should go with appropriating those bodies. But maybe art can also develop visions of mutating bodies for the cause of care, mutual and inclusive care. Is it a question?
Yeah. That's a how we say that's a big question. I would first come up with a question too. Do we have any other option than just to proceed? Maybe we can, just like slow it down a little bit, or to have the contemporary metaphor, flatten the curve. But do we have, is there a way out not to do it? Because you can observe this in many fields of human activity, like in art, science, economy, and it's like it comes to the nihilistic technological understanding of being, which we are in, like. So that's like this comes from Heidegger when he tried to differentiate in the history of the West, the Geistesgeschichte. There were roughly like 5 or 6 big epochs. So like he starts with the Greek understanding of being, what it is to be, what it is to be a thing, what it is to be a human. And then it came the Roman understanding of being and the Christian understanding of being. And right now, I think he sees it at the final stage, the technological nihilistic understanding of being. And so one of the things that happens here is that we see everything as a resource, even if for ourselves. That's why it's also termed like having an essence or having an identity is all those fixities that used to be fixities are kind of were made fluid, especially by postmodern technology, like digital technology. You can see it all over the place. I mean, even if there are so many examples, if you look like it goes from dating apps, for example, to cross-border leasing, like relationships, human relationships had some kind of a fixity. And but with these technologies like dating apps, Tinder as such, those relationships can easily turned on, turned off again. You see it like Airbnb, what used to be a fixity is your apartment. And now you can have one spare room, you can make it a touristic resource. And even how you see yourself, just like getting the most out of your education, getting the most out of your holidays. You have all kinds of tools, or cross-border leasing. You just like what all the communities are doing. They're just selling the trams and the tracks to hedge funds and lease them back. In former days, they could make money out of like selling tickets, from the train. Now there are these other ways, and maybe you know it in the Netherlands even more, all those cargo ships before they arrive, how many times that the cargo has been sold and sold again, And this is like, and then you can see it, and you have the same in art, so that this is like this underlying force, if you will. And in art, everything is having everything as a material, So everything is seen as a material. You can talk about everything. You can bring everything up in art. But in the end, so this kind of foundation is missing. And so there's the thing, so, and this is a, so Heidegger's list is more like this infinite processes of aggregation and disaggregation, just for the sake of ordering. You know, you always ordering this anew, and just like treating everything as a resource waiting to be optimized, and there's no end in it. And so as long as we are in this current like understanding of what it is to be, I think there is no way out. And
yeah, but could I go back to Agnieszka, because you showed that you observe a new current in art making there, an art making that goes beyond this this appropriative
You're asking
material.
me?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting what you said, Gunther, because it's exactly what I try to overcome. So this your description and your recognition that there is this nihilistic trend, right? Once we realize that there are no fixed bodies, that there are no essences, there are no you know, like the universals, right? There can only be negation of it. So this logic of binary that that indeed operated and governed philosophical thoughts for a long time, although despite, you know, people like Spinoza before, of course, pre-Socratics, I could even say, would try to overcome this binary, right, within the thought that either there is essence or either there is none. So either there is a thing or there is no thing, right? Within thought, so within the practice of artists, within the material feminist thinking, is this realization, is this bringing of possibility to think outside the binary, outside this this binary normative understanding, a logic of creation, where if something is not fixed does not mean that it's irrelevant or non, or, you know, like. So what if we could think about our bodies as already constantly in the process of change? It then means that the old habits of how we understand what is value, what is a right thing to do, maybe also have to change its structures and its practices and its logic, right? We do not know actually how can we live as a society, and we are now experiencing this as this mutating, contaminating bodies. We are immediately jumping into indeed old characteristics of pretending that we are autonomous, that we have some sort of unpenetrable body, that we can just, you know, pour alcohol on ourselves and we will be safe. So so I think it's we are indeed, especially within the philosophy and humanistic thought and cultural thought, we are indeed overpowered by the dialectics and by this dualistic hierarchy of thought. And, you know, artists, as I, you know, investigate and research, already provide us rich ways, not out, because there is no way out. We are already immersed in it. There is no outside of the reality that you have and outside your body that you embody. But we indeed we don't know how to talk, how to practice it. So artists, as I map, provide some form of ways of embodying and situating ourselves within this precarity and uncomfortability even. Yeah.
Marta, you wanted to...
Well, just a few add-on, because then like because like this stage is like so much connected to technology that you cannot say that we are using technology, not even for the good or for the bad. It's our way of living, and there's no. It's almost so hard to think yourself out of that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hardly to imagine that. How would a world look beyond that? By looking back, how was the Greek understanding of being, or how was the Roman or Christian understanding of being? Which, I mean, they had the same phenomena, like what encounters you in life, even the body, sexuality, but it always had a different kind of meaning. And now that we see that it's so open, that's like in this kind of nihilism, that there is no grounding of meaning, that we can. I mean, it could be a chance and to freedom. We can give ourselves whatever meaning we want. We can interpret ourselves and our doings, whatever. But I mean, I see there a chance that it could come from literature or maybe art, but I mean, there were two times like humans could really change that. It was like René Descartes was one of the person, and Jesus Christ, you know, those were like those two figures who were able to transform the understanding of being. I mean, Jesus Christ, doesn't matter if he really existed or not, but like he transformed the world of antiquity, because like in the world of antiquity, they had no sense for introspection or from what's inside you or what your thoughts. So, you know, the religious rules, like the 10 Commandments, were only 10 out of 700. So it was like, just like confirming you, and Jesus was the first one. It's not just like following the rules, it's also what your thoughts are, you know, if you, and and this really transformed the antiquity, like having this kind of introspection. I mean, it took Christianity like 800 years to try to explain it. It's Plato that I think that didn't work well. A little bit better with Aristotle.
If I understand you correctly, so you are searching for the ways of thinking differently about the technological overpower of human, or because I'm not sure
how the whole understanding of being could be transformed. It was possible for humans, you know. You cannot identify humans like that for the Greek, for the poiesis understanding of how physics came about, but like with René Descartes, that we are basically subject confronted with object, that was a big transformation in like the 16th century, you can say. And that was like, you know, it was like.
Well, I wouldn't say Descartes was, I cannot believe we are discussing now philosophy, so please forgive us. But Descartes was just, he was just, you know, a celebrity of his time. So he was just repeating stuff that was popular.
Was like he was like a medium of what was going on.
He was a medium what was already gone. I think the one who tried to change the course of things and actually introduce already a post-anthropocentric understanding, ecological thinking was Spinoza, who, as we know, was totally expert and lost his career. So I'm not sure where we are going. But
no, okay, sorry for the details, because I'm not so known to that details. But it's possible for, you know, having like literature kind of like focusing to really show what's going on, and then maybe out of that something new could.
But I also would like to go back to the kind of art we're talking about here, because we're talking about art that deals with mutagenesis, with applying these types. These types of scientific techniques, but that are also, and I'm looking at the chat, that are also based on a still extremely limited understanding of what our DNA can do and how it does constitute our bodies. There's still so much to know, yet at the same time, it is already indeed brought into this nihilistic appropriation. But I think there may be much more there. Can we move away there if you talk about the non-neutralness that Agnieszka is also talking about? And I want to give the word to Marta. Yes, you were waiting.
I know it is. So I'm always not sure if I should say this because it's sort of but for instance, in terms of the question, where are we going to get inspiration to change our perspective of life? And I think anybody in their own discipline will look for its own discipline to look for inspiration to change perspectives. I think one of the characteristics of artists working with the sciences and with the biological sciences is that we very much look outside of our discipline to find other ways of looking at the same things that we've been looking for a very long time. And I think this is important. Now, I know this does not directly have to do with manipulation of genes, but I'm also very much aware that I am a subject of my of the sciences and the disciplines of biology that I have been working with recently, and maybe not so recently. So I'm sorry, but actually I would suggest to you, Agnieszka, you should look into immunology for possible roots and metaphors and ways of thinking about things that will probably be really interesting for you to explore in terms of the discourse that you're constructing. By the way, I loved your presentation. It was incredibly clear, which is always a benefit for someone who's not in the philosophy area. And it was like Pedro said, broadening in terms of ways of thinking about these issues. I get asked a lot because I do a lot of presentations to many different kinds of audiences, and especially when I do it to scientists, they keep asking me, what is art? Okay. And I always have to explain a little bit, because we also have scientists here, and I know they are dying to ask this question. They've probably been told that they cannot ask it because it's not kosher to do so. In a way, what is art? What is art for? Is also one of the very common questions, which is sort of even a trickier question. I don't know which one is trickier. And so I've been asked this question repeatedly. And more recently also by art students, which is okay, a very good sign, because I do think that question needs to be asked often, even if we don't find the answer to it. And it's part of the nature of art to be continuously reinventing its own definition. And this is why it's so dangerous to ask that question to an artist. I usually like to say something, which is a story, and I'm going to say this here, and I apologize for bringing this issue into place, but I do think it's related to why we're doing art in biology departments, and why is biology such an important field of knowledge production for art, for the artistic knowledge production as well. I think a lot of you know that I'm married to an immunologist, so bringing immunology into the play is kind of something I feel I need to do, but it gives me so most scientists that I know that are not immunologists will think, oh, you're going to see an immunology lecture, and they go, I'm never going to see an immunology lecture. It's too complicated. They just speak in letters, and they don't use words, and so it is a little bit like that. It is an incredibly complex thing, but it's also a field that I think is gaining relevance in terms of transforming the way we understand humans, we understand systems, we understand the life So it is going into, it's, to me, when I look at what they're thinking and what they're doing, it makes me sometimes look at them and think, you're doing philosophy and you just don't know it. Okay, so this is why I think you should look into it too. And one of the things that Luis has been telling me from I don't know, almost since we've met each other, is that the immune system is the most creative organ in our bodies. Okay, and the way he explains it is there are two reasons why he thinks it's the most creative system in our organ in our body. The first one is because it is ready to deal with everything that it has dealt with before, that it has encountered before. So everything that it has encountered before, and this relates to contamination, everything that our human immune system, or any immune system, even bacterial immune system, which relates to CRISPR, has encountered before, is somehow stored there, and it's ready to deal with it. And this is why it exists in many cases. But it's also ready to deal with and has mechanisms to deal with everything that it's going to encounter in the future, without knowing what that is. So dealing with the unknown, which is something that I think relates to the things that you were discussing, okay? The second reason is that actually the immune system in our body creates cells in our body that are cut and paste compositions that make them have a different set of genes than all the other cells in our body. So that's also an interesting aspect of the immune system, is that the B lymphocytes have a different genetic code because the immune system is creating that genetic code to deal with the unknown in a way. Which is, it's, for me, understanding this was mind-blowing, and it still is. And so I have been, over the last years, trying to understand how this can be, how can this transform my understanding, and how can this be turned into artworks that will allow other people to understand this mind-blowing events that happen in my knowledge. But when people ask me what is art, I often think as art as the immune system of culture, of culture as a whole. Okay, it already includes everything that it has been before, everything that it has encountered before. And it's not limited by that. It's ready to become everything that it will become in the future, no matter the parameters of that transformation. And for me, this is really important to overcome that binary kind of situation that we put ourselves in when we think about art, when we think about technology, when you think about humanity. So this is all I wanted to say and suggest to you to look into. I'm very happy to have long conversations about this with you.
Yes, thank you, Marta. That's a fantastic quote.
If I just because as a matter of fact, you know, I was already studying immunity, but from, you know, perspectives. So, for instance, Donna Haraway was writing about the immunity, Esposito. So more within, again, cultural studies, right? But indeed, for a long time, the criticism on immunity was that it had its military connotation, right? It's always we versus them. But indeed, what you indicated, the way, especially when they are now studying microbiome, right, that this understanding of immunity is more nuanced, and it's not a clear-cut boundary between this dualistic boundary between me versus them. So,
absolutely, I agree with you, and it's actually something that the immunology and most of the immunologists that I know are trying to overcome. Can we overcome this historical bias of thinking immunology and the immune system as a war game.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it really isn't.
And I think, I think this is exactly what is at stake, to go back to the topic of today. So why do we, what kind of mutation and transformation do we desire, right? When artists are doing CRISPR or any other forms of mutation of bodies, is exactly to think along the line to overcome this this dualistic or binary understanding of bodies, where either we strive for some idea and protecting some idea of a body that we want, that we desire, and therefore we equip ourselves and all the transformation in the pursuit to fulfill this desire, or to protect what we believe is pure, is given. Right, so this understanding and conditioning situation where we can think and we can create an experiment with bodies otherwise. And this again it goes back to the way how we formulate knowledge. What do we value as a society? What do we value as as bodies? And what kind of pace and what kind of spaces should we create? It also, of course, is correlated as well.
Agnieszka, sorry, I didn't listen to the entirety of your talk. I really had to leave. So when I came, you were already speaking. So I'm not sure I understood, like, where do you stand? Like, you are a philosopher? You're doing research on because I remember Lucas saying that he invited you because you could give an ethical perspective. So like, I thought you would come from cultural studies, from philosophy. So you would bring you are, say, please.
So yes, I was trained as a philosopher, and I was studying philosophy of art and art science relations. So
okay, because I was trying to make sense. When I arrived, you had a big word in your screen, which was contamination, and then you talked about symbiotic survival, and you had a quote I wrote, which was, it's not about a state of choice, or we are not in a state of choice or control, it's a state of care. And I love that quote, that's why I wrote it down. And then I got stuck in when you said there's a change of perspective from, and I couldn't understand, I couldn't grasp who, is this like from the philosophy point of view, what can I know? Because this was something they asked in Greece, right, 2,000 years ago, and they realized they know nothing, right? So since then, we know nothing, and we can never know enough. But then you kept that is not that was not a problem to me. The problem to me was where this would go, because you said we are changing from what can I know into what must I do and what can I hope.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, okay, that's fine from only like a self-introspective perspective, like okay, a reflective perspective, because for us from the arts, I think it's much more it's much more about how. It's the how, not the what, that really drives us. Mm-hmm. And I've been trying to get what she was saying from what everybody else was commenting, and trying to see, okay, am I smart enough to to pick up all the pieces and then make, what are they talking about? Mm-hmm. And I think I agree with what everybody's saying, but I think we are all saying the same thing, really. And I agree with Marta when she's saying immunology is a great field. I had the privilege to work with her husband before as an artist, but he's an immunologist. So I learned from him and from his group and from the talks with the group and the research they were doing to change my perspective on immunology from that war affair zone into something that is much more about the discourse you were talking about. So lots of words that you were using already, like the fluidity or symbiosis or situated something. Immunology is always about the situated knowledge, because it's always about the negotiation on site. So you have anything that you have to react upon is not a reaction against, so it does not need to be polarized. And I think all the moment we are living now in our culture, I think is beyond, and I think that's why immunology is being accepted, although it has a charge of defense system. And of course, if you pick up theories that are from the 20th century, then all the literature would go in that sense. But if you pick up something more recent, then you will find out that it's much more about this negotiation. It's much more fluid. It's not about a defense anymore. It's about creativity. It's about exploring all the archive of previous events, and then deciding. So it's always a network thing with nodes. It's never more a map with a line that is the frontier, and then there's a trespassing, and then a transgression, and then you need an attack to overcome the transgression. As Pedro was saying, now we know that an organism like a human being is not 100% human being, right? Or meaning a human being needs to be much more, maybe more than 100% of many different things. And someday maybe we'll change, and 100% will not be enough, so we'll have to change the equation. But we know now that we are many, and that I think that implies in all the definitions of identity now. It implies in all the definitions of how we address the concept of contamination or even of body. The polarized like queer theory is now being used as a lens to inspect ecology, for instance, because it addresses all that wider perspective that I think we are all in agreement, which is great. So we don't understand each other's languages, and I've been exchanging chatting with Kat, because in the morning it was the opposite. They would say something in the lab, and I would ask, "What the hell is that?" Like, okay, please speak a language that is common. We can whistle and then pretend it's common to all of us. But then it's, as Marta say, when they talk about immunology, they talk about numbers. And we are outside, and now we talk about concepts that are from philosophy, and somebody that comes from science might say, okay, I'm a bit outside because I'm not sure what they mean about that term. Sorry, Lucas, I didn't want to talk too much.
No. If you're finished, that's good. I would like to get a reaction from Felipe, because he's saying much good things in the chat. But coming from a scientific background, I'm curious how you, because to my feeling, it would be interesting to work with this observation of Agnieszka, that this is not neutral, yet this is possibly about care. And these metaphors that we can find in immunology are not only defense metaphors, they're also metaphors about care. So how could we possibly bring this notion of care, which also comes from what we observe a lot of art is currently moving to, but also from queer and feminist theory, and care about interspecies relations. Can you say something about that, Felipe? And then I also want to have Mari say something, because she also says something in the chat about the notion, her interest for the notion of the autoimmune. But first, Felipe, please.
Thank you, Lucas. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. And Julio is not here, but I should also thank him for the opportunity to participate here today. Well, I absolutely am a noob in the artistic field. I'm more into the scientific one. And even that, I'm just a PhD student. But nowadays I'm working more into the microbiology, but before I did some work in immunology as well. So that is the reason why I can give some input on that field as well. And I find it very interesting in the philosophical point of view as well, because, you know, it's not kind of war, but the microorganisms, you know, the organisms that live with us, they are as many as our own cells, as Pedro said. We lived and we co-evolved with them for several thousand years, and now we are much more into a kind of conversation than in a war. So in the way, it's a kind of yes, it's like a conversation, living day by day. And sometimes it's just a matter of care, because you don't care about them, and sometimes they don't care about you, and then diseases happen. And nowadays we are actually manipulating this stuff. When you take probiotics, you eat yogurt or something like that, you are changing your flora, you're changing the community that lives inside of you. When you disinfect your hands, you're changing the flora on your hands. And I think nowadays contamination is not neutral. And so the decontamination is also not neutral, because it's kind of every government is addressing that issue. They even send us short messages to the phone, please disinfect your hands. So the government is in a way changing our relationship to microbes. And what can I say more? Well, it's just some remarks, philosophical remarks. I think that microbiology and immunology are good fields. So if you can dissert a bit more on these philosophical terms, what are we? Are we humans even? Microbes are more, we have more microbes than our own cells. So you can start, I have a microbiome, therefore I am. I don't know, something like that. Thanks.
Exactly, maybe that's what it means to be human. Now we know that being human is living in like a tangible equilibrium of organisms.
Yeah, Mari, can you say something about your interest for autoimmuneness? And could you possibly imagine autoimmune or immunology art?
No, this is quite in the beginning of my what I've been interested in, and just one of the threads that I'm kind of like looking at, because I find it I find it really fascinating that your own body kind of turns against you, and also from the point of view that does it really do that, or is there some other reason for that? And at the same time, I'm of course acknowledging this, like that there are, even though many of the autoimmune diseases, it's not known what is causing them, but there's a lot of speculation about the environmental, like the pollution and this kind of which we have kind of released to the environment. So I just wanted to say that this was really fascinating, because I've been thinking about this lately a lot. So I didn't have like really a big point about it. Just to say.
Yeah, thank you. Could we imagine something like, and that's, well, could we imagine an interspecies autoimmune reaction, like an ecological autoimmune reaction?
Well, isn't that what's happening right now?
Exactly, that's what I was saying. Isn't that the excessive care that we promoted in the environment in some cases, like with the azote. What's the name for azote in English? Nitrogen. We were caring for the soil, but we care, and now there's an extra reaction, because it's almost like an autoimmune reaction from the environment. towards our act of care. But of course, care was connected to what I think it was Gunther saying earlier, to the exploitation that we see all the world around us as resource. And then it's our human-centric position. So because we look around and we just see resources, then we care towards the profit of those resources. And then maybe, I remember that Luis Graça used to tell me about the autoimmune part of the immunity in our body, which was the immune system is so creative. Then when it has nothing to be creative with, is creative within itself. So he pretends he's sick just to have to negotiate with his own equilibrium, to be unbalanced, to then reach or search for balance again. So that's why I kept eating, earth and things like, if I was licking glasses or kissing many different people. So just to increase the creativity of the immune system, to make sure it never goes bored, and so it never gets one of those. Also,
yes. Saliva exchanges are very good for your health.
Keeps your immune system busy, right? So it doesn't say, oh, okay, I'm bored. Everything is disinfected. We'll have many more diseases after the pandemics, because we keep disinfecting everything and decontaminating everything, that probably something strange will happen after this, if this takes too long.
Yeah,
not sure Luis is the expert.
It's like dogs licking everything, even sewing machines.
Somebody has a picture of a dog.
It's Gunther.
Machine. Is Gunther?
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, could we do one round where everybody says something about a new imagined artwork that works with contamination? That is a new sort of bio artwork, or that you can imagine that comes from this conversation we had this afternoon. Is that doable, or is that not doable?
Could I start?
Yes, please, Pedro.
Okay. It follows on the link that I just left. I would say that one of the things that for me is on the verge of contaminating and having the care that we are also talking a lot is this xenotransplantation. So how do we transplant organs? This is a theme that is not new. This is not any novelty. We heard about this a long time ago. We are still discussing it now, more with the advent of CRISPR. So that leaves that is kind of my contribution, is maybe making that, let's say, some work that can follow on this CRISPR in the relation with the arts, that looks to this perspective of when are you contaminating and when are you saving people's lives, in a way, and how people perceive these, because maybe we think that everybody will say, sure, it's to save lives, why not? But I would say that the discussion for this can actually drive to other ones, because if you imagine that what these scientists did, that they just eliminated 62 genes that are responsible, like at once, that are responsible for making these organs to be transplantable, to be viable, would they think the same way? Would the way that they think be a little bit different? So I would say that this could be a point for discussion, but I don't know what you feel about it. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Could you also imagine xenotransplantation solely for aesthetic reasons?
I can imagine it. Of course, I cannot I don't think this is something that will just be kept away from us every time in the long future. But I don't know if maybe the necessity for it could be the question. So what is the real necessity for it if we haven't even overcome some of the most basic transplantation part for the health-related situations? I think first we have to overcome that, and then maybe we can have that discussion later on. Still, I don't think the discussion should just vanish because we are still away from it. I just think that should have priority in the way that we discuss these kind of things in terms of how real they can be. But sure, I can imagine it.
Thank you, Pedro. Who wants to be next? I saw a thumbs up of Günther. Come on, Günther.
Imagine something.
Felipe, yes.
It could also be life-saving, and it's not very ethically risky, I think. And it happens sometimes naturally when you work in the lab with microbes. I'm sorry for taking the same topic again, but still, I find it interesting. Sometimes most of the times we work with axionic cultures, meaning just one species at a time. But sometimes cultures get contaminated by accident. And sometimes the contaminations are very useful, like penicillin, you know, it was a contamination of a fungi inside of bacterial culture. But I know there are some species that can trigger the production of antibiotics in others. And sometimes not just antibiotics, but also pigments, for instance. And I know that some can be blue or red, and you could track back those kinds of organisms and do artistic approach in mixing stuff and looking for new colors, new and potentially new interesting stuff. But as well, you always risk taking some toxins, or you never know what's going to be in the lottery, you know? That could also be risky in a way.
Yeah, so not just a GFP bunny, but a GFP Felipe or Julia or Lucas. Thank you. Who else?
I just get the discussion right now. Sorry, I was in another thing, but
sorry, Julio. Look,
yeah?
we are trying to reply to a provocation that Lucas made us, and the provocation was, after all we saw and heard these 2 days, if we could envision a CRISPR WAAG project. And then Pedro suggested that we would start from the text that he just posted on the chat. So you can go to the chat and see.
I just get it in, so I don't see the
I'll copy the link and put it there. Okay, just to locate you.
Anyway, Pedro, Philippe was saying, well, about the last issue that Philippe raised on is, I remember the long discussion about OGMs in a few years ago. And I remember that once there was a very classical improvement of crops method that gave rise to a potato that was very toxic. And the characteristics of the potato were very good. But when they tried to see if we could eat, and it was very, very toxic. And at that time, the people were discussing, because, well, I don't know if you know, but most of the potato family are very toxic. So normally the upper part of the plant is toxic. The tuber is not toxic, but the upper part of the plant is toxic. So in that at the same time in which that new strain came out, there was a discussion about the toxicity of the OGM. So sometimes natural things get very very wrong. Natural way of doing things, and using CRISPR, using other kind of genetic modification of the organisms are also dangerous, but not necessarily more dangerous or less dangerous than the other. And just adding the same thing is about Pedro. Well, actually, I think these exercises, mostly of the exercises on art, exploration of technology, are great. For me, at least, it's my point of view. It's my are great triggers of discussion of future scenarios that one technology can lead us into. It's just a new thing, a new change, and we need to think. And arts and that, I think that humanities should be very involved in this process, because well, utopian studies are these. We include a new technology, and we need to reshape what we know about things. Well, for instance, COVID is not a new technology, something that happened naturally, but it could be a technology that just spread around the world. Some of the theorists are now saying that was a China thing, but actually it reshaped completely our current knowledge of and our perception of our organization. So I think those exercises in advance are always great. Think the things before they are there. So xenotransplantation, CRISPR things, well, we need to think about it. And they are there, and you can use it in the biohacking space.
Thank you, Julio. Anyone? We can't hear you, Marta. You're muted.
I have a question that I'm probably going to put to Luis as well, but it came up during our conversation right now, and it has to do with transplantation and xenotransplantation as well. So I'm not sure to answer it, but we can discuss it a little bit, I think. So my hypothesis and question would be, and I know we can, for instance, think about my project that I presented here, the Truly Natural, where you re-engineer or engineer the mouse to recover the immune system. You could also engineer, theoretically, you could engineer a complete reboot of the system, of the immune system for transplantation. And my question has to do with, if you have a xenotransplant and you completely reboot the immune system of someone, would that new immune system recognize the transplant as other still?
That question is for?
For anybody that knows anything about immune system.
I will think about it and then tomorrow and with the answer.
Well, to reboot the immune system will be a magic thing. I think everybody's trying to do that.
I think it's interesting to keep this.
One of the strategies in transplantation would be to reboot the immune system, or to teach the immune system what if that specific something is not to be taken as other and to be taken as self. What I'm wondering is, if you have a reboot of the system just after or just before the transplant is done, would that be enough for the new immune system to learn that that new organ is also a self?
Oh, yeah. Wow.
That would be the solution for immunologists, right? The debate with immunosuppression all their lives. So that would be the
For
not
all-
$1 million, but
maybe
For-
CRISPR can do that. Maybe CRISPR is a strategy that can actually do that.
But isn't the very idea of rebuting exactly perpetuating this logic that there is this, you know, natural state or the state of, you know, what is self, you know? So I take it as a tricky question, Marta, because it's exactly undermining the very, you know, argument and challenge that you propose in your work, that it's a pure nonsense to rebuke something that constantly is to change and is to transform. So to what state? And then it's immediately an ideological and an artificial state to rebuke.
Maybe it's about taking the transformation to the extreme, yes? But I know Pedro just left. Okay, sorry. I thought he had something.
He had another meeting.
Oh.
I have I have another thing that relates to this, and I can. I should be short. I think I can say some more. I had this idea already since long, and I think, but that's just my intuition as a non-scientist. It has something to do with the immune system. And it's not about xenotransplantation, but it's a more complex kind of bodily characteristic that large animals, large mammals have. Bears can hibernate. How can we use maybe a technique like genetic modification to make our bodies hibernate, which would, make us move less, make our carbon footprint smaller, make us circumvent our winter depressions, make us not have the flu in November, make us circumvent infections like COVID, make us be eaten by large other predatory mammals that break into our homes where we are sleeping. And being eaten not knowingly, of course it's it's bullshit, but I always thought about that in actually this little project I did where also Mary and Spela and others were present. Also Günther, that was called the Do-It-Yourself Human Enhancement Clinic, where I think we should try to think of not so conventional bodily characteristics that we could change for aesthetical reasons, for absurd reasons, only to limit ourselves, moving away from the ever ongoing appropriation of other bodies. Could it be possible? And if in discussions I had with Spela about her work, where she tries to breed plants that are born because of her hormones being added, and her own attempts of trying to investigate whether she can be brought into a coma as an art performance, as a consequence of trying to immobilize our bodies because we occupy so much space, because we influence too many other bodies. So yeah, that's what I could put into this discussion here. I don't see Helsinki anymore. Are you still there?
They wrote somewhere they need to leave.
Oh, they need to leave from the lab, I think.
Yeah.
But Lucas, what you brought into the table is exactly this, this question: are we ready and are we able to think about ourselves otherwise? So what actually this symbiotic new material, non-anthropocentric way of thinking entails, and are we actually ready to embrace it, and to what extent? Because you know, the types of mutation and contamination we are striving for is usually, you know, highly self-centered, is usually anthropocentric. It has to serve first human. We already have a fixed idea of what is healthy body, right? What is desirable body. Aesthetic, there is already a hierarchy of values, right? The categories of beauty, as, you know, having a beautiful hair or having, you know, like certain features is less important than, you know, being a healthy, regardless of what it means. So indeed, the challenge in front of us is, can we think about ourselves differently? And by can we think about ourselves differently, I mean to take it into, you know, to the radical extent, like Marta proposed. So yeah, I will stop there, because then I will go again and again. Right. So I don't think that we are ready, because we are still operating according to, you know, the logic of safety, of control, of thinking about ourselves still as human, despite the fact that, you know, the fact says, because usually when I encountered scientists and they were not as brilliant as you guys, there was usually the immediate response that, well, if only we would get facts straight, there will be no discussion, right? So this understanding that the facts, so the scientific values, has more priority than any social, cultural, and also, you know, like intimate understanding of what it means to you know, to be a body, living body. So if I would have to ask a reply to your question, you know, what kind of art do we want? I would still go back and say, well, I would still think what kind of spaces and moods and times we need to condition in order for this different possibility of thinking to emerge. And I think this is the most urgent question, like how can we design spaces for this collaboration, for this talk, but also ways of thinking where, you know, mutation can emerge, where bodies flourish rather than you know, destroy each other or something like that, to put it really bluntly.
Yeah, be limited. Yeah.
Can I just say something? I was listening to what you were saying about self and body and human, and the barrier between us and other living beings, and about science as well, and science's role in this. I'm not from science. My background is not in science, but one of the things science allowed me, or knowing a few things about science allowed me to perceive, was that our concept of ourselves is wrong. Our bodies are not our bodies, because they are other living creatures at the same time. We are eukaryotes because of a bacteria that allow us to have how you say it in English?
The microbiome inside of us.
Microbes?
Mitochondria.
Mitochondria.
Mitochondria. We have mitochondria because of at the same time, our bodies are full of microorganisms that allow us to be alive. So this notion of a human as a unique entity is false scientifically, because we are a collective of informations from our own genetic code and other genetic codes that come in there from other living beings. So even this notion of, yeah, Julio, you are the scientist. Go ahead.
No, I'm not a scientist. No, I'm not a scientist. Actually, what you were saying and what Marta told about the reboot of the immune system, it came to me lots of things, because this kind of thing of a self, body, identity, it's a very complex thing that the discussion is always about the boundaries. If I take my liver and I put a new liver, I'm still myself. My former boss usually asked how many organs I need to transplant to not to be myself anymore.
Yeah.
So there is a quantity, is just one organ is rebooting the system, because eventually the rebooting of the immune system also can treat autoimmune diseases that are parts of ourselves against ourselves. It's acting like a police that policemen that are not from our body but checking our body. It's something strange. How the immune system works, and eventually heading a little bit more about what Annabelle was saying, is there are lots of papers coming out now saying that neurological diseases and some psychiatric problems, disorders are related with microbiome in the gut. So even the perception of my identity can be influenced by external things that are living inside me in the gut. So that thing of identity and self is a very explosive space for discussion, and CRISPR as a very precise surgical technique is not the most important thing in this whole world. It's just a technique that is different from the rest because it's precise. More or less precise, but yes, is the most precise way to act in a very simple dot of information in all this complex system.
I would love to have a poo transplantation that gets rid of my consumerist part of my microbiome.
Maybe you can have bear poo, and then maybe you will have the urge to go to sleep for 3 months and hibernate.
Yeah. Sorry for making this dirty joke. I'm looking at time, and I would love to have a drink with you all because I really loved this afternoon. But I also want to come to a sort of conclusion. Well, I don't think I want to have another conclusion than that I really loved all your contributions. I loved that we were able to use Return to Dilmun for This is a Hang-Up.